right, you're back with Justine McIntyre sitting in for Elias Makos today and tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. We're in transit now, and this time we're going to do things a little differently because it really is time that we change the dialogue around our roads. You notice in our little intro theme there that we hear a bit of everything. We hear a bit of cars, we hear a bit of metro, we hear bikes, but it really has become a source of friction. There's a rivalry still that exists between cyclists and motorists, and kind of this question of who really owns the road. So here to talk with us about how we can flip the script is Tom Flood. He is creative, strategic, and content development for Rovélo Creative. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Listen, it's great to have you on the show. I don't think we've actually had a chance to speak in person, but I do follow a lot of what you do. I've listened to your talk, and I love seeing your posts on Twitter because you really are working to flip the script.
Well, thank you so much. You're right. We haven't had a chance to speak yet, so thanks for having me on today.
Pleasure. Now, Tom, you're in Hamilton. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so Hamilton has a very, very different urban layout than Montreal. So the challenges must be very different there. So you've probably been following some of what's been happening here in Montreal in terms of extending the bike infrastructure downtown. Especially, we have what's called the Express, the REV, which is the Réseau Express Vélo, which is the express lanes for bicycles in downtown Montreal. Which are very heavily used, but caused a certain amount of friction when they were put in, because they're, for some people, it's adding space for bikes, and for others, it's taking space away from cars. So, and that is really at the core of what I want to talk to you about today. But tell us a little bit about the challenges that are specific to you in Hamilton.
Well, I think the challenges are, sadly very common across many cities, despite, kind of the layout of our cities. Mm-hmm. When we talk about kind of the dialogue around active transportation, the real challenges are for us to be able to communicate better. And, we've had a campaign for, 100 years now that's been very, auto and driver reverent. And that's really trickled down into our common discussion and common vernacular when we speak about people outside of the car. And that language is kind of really permeated into political discourse and really provided some sort of fuel for a lot of our decision makers that sometimes thrive on that divisiveness when making decisions. So I think the challenges are very similar wherever you are, because this discussion is something we just, like you said at the beginning, we need to flip the script on how we talk about people outside of the car, because generally they've been dehumanized and vilified to a certain extent. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in this idea of the creation of a common vernacular that you bring up, and the fact that there has been a push, and these things don't happen overnight, right? It's over the course of decades, the automotive industry made themselves absolutely indispensable, and that has impacted not just the vehicle that we're using to get around, but of course also the lay of the land, how cities developed around the car, and the fact that it's almost, there are rites of passage even about, getting your driver's license, and then and it's impacted also how we visualize our roadmap that we have in our mind of how we get around the city, and going from point A to B automatically implies getting into a vehicle. So that has been dominated by the automotive industry. How does somebody like you get into people's minds to change that script? How do you do that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people that are working in this space and have worked tirelessly in this space to do just that. I'm one tiny voice here, but I think one way in is just looking at the language that we use. When you mentioned the automotive industry, they've got billions of dollars spent over 100 years, and accelerated in the last 40 years. So we have it's kind of a long game, unfortunately, but we really need to look at how things have been positioned. One, from the automotive voices, and two, from a leadership voice, and three, from an authoritative voice. And if you look at who have essentially kind of held the mic on this topic for far too long and almost exclusively, So that language that they've been using is what I was saying earlier, is kind of seeped into that common vernacular. And what we need to do is just flip that script, but we need to do that in a way that can be relatable to everybody across the board, regardless of how we move.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's saying and then there's doing. And a big part of getting people to change their behavior is getting them to change their behavior, right? Because you can debate until you're blue in the face, and we can talk about it here on the radio if you want all morning. But, actually getting somebody to change their habits is the most effective way to get them to change their ideas about things. So the best way to get people to change their habits, right, is to get them on a bike or to get them to walk somewhere. How do you get people to take that first step in changing their habits?
Well, I think that there's many ways, but I think an important way is to change, again, the discussion to our local councillors and our local politicians to start implementing, the safe design that can actually get people out walking and biking. And I know that's a massive undertaking, but getting the right people in the decision-making process that will then trickle down and allow those changes to be made, I think is a big one.
Well, sure. I mean, because if you don't feel safe getting on a bike, you're not going to get on a bike. And a big part of feeling safe getting on a bike is making sure that the infrastructure is there to support it. So, as I said at the start of our talk, we're quite lucky to have some really good cycling infrastructure here in Montreal. We still have road accidents, sadly. So what more can be done in terms of making people feel safe, and what are the things, like what's sort of your top 3 list, or I don't know if it's 3 or maybe it's more, of what needs to be put in place to give people a sense of security?
Okay, well, I think protected and connected networks are the absolute standard that we need to be working towards. Mm-hmm. But for me, and kind of my part in this, it's really trying to, this is not exactly answering your question, but it's trying to highlight the absurdity that exists on our streets, mm-hmm. that a lot of people just don't see, or we become somewhat blind to these absurdities. I mean, for me, I never even really saw how dangerous our spaces were, and I was always someone cycling and walking in Toronto for many years, and I didn't see it until I took my kids out on their bikes to school for the first time. And so to me, as someone who didn't come from transportation, does not come from advocacy, had no real interest in municipal affairs, it was such a wake-up call to me. And that's something that I think kind of drives me, sorry for that pun there, to continue to try to highlight some of these absurdities that we can all relate to. And I think the more that we can relate to some of these really dangerous situations on our streets, the more change can come from the ground up and influence the politicians to make the changes that will keep people safe. Right.
So it's about looking at the situation from the eyes of a child. And when you see it through the eyes of your kid, then it does look pretty scary. And I think that if we can get our politicians, our decision makers, to adopt that perspective and to see the world from the eyes of a kid on their bike, then we'd get the infrastructure that we need.
Yeah, I mean, I truly hope so. I mean, it's a really great way to look through the eyes of someone who's a bit more vulnerable than ourselves.
Tom Flood, thank you so much for speaking with us today on In Transit. That was Tom Flood calling in from Hamilton. He's the creative, strategic, and content development for Rovélo Creative, and somebody who's flipping the script on who owns the road.